Good morning. Welcome to church. My name is Mike. I'm one of the leaders here at Risen City. It's so awesome to be here with you today. If this is your first time with us, if this is your first time maybe in church in a while, maybe it's your first time in church ever, we want to say a special welcome to you today, honestly. You are truly part of the reason why we actually do church the way that we do, to help people like you meet and encounter Jesus. Because as I said earlier, we don't believe that God is a nice philosophy to think about, just some idea to have in our mind, some novel thing to be spiritual about. We believe that God is a person who's revealed in Jesus, who desires to know us, be known by us, to meet with us. And as we grow in that relationship with Him, we believe that we actually have our souls changed. That He, as Jesus says, gives us this thing called eternal life, where heaven invades our heart, begins to change who we are and how we live and operate, and just brings us to what we would argue would be the best life possible, in fact. Not always the easiest, right? But it is the best one. We would argue that the way of Jesus is the best idea that there is, the best story that there is, the best philosophy that there could be, the best person to be known in all of the opportunities of religion, philosophy, and ideas that exist in the world today, that His is the way to be truly human again. And so we're excited to be pursuing that and finding that out. And one of the ways that we do that here is by this thing called the Bible. Now, as Christians, we don't believe that this book is just some old ancient document that has some stories and poems and whatnot in it. Although it does have stories and poems and narratives and things like that, we believe that this is a good word from our good God for the good of our soul, that as we come under it and submit to the truth in it, that we listen to the words of God through Jesus and Paul and other writers, that we are led to life, led to the flourishing of our soul, that we can apprentice life from the one who authored it itself. And so we're excited to be doing that here today as we continue in a series or a mini-series. It's going to be about 2 weeks, just last week and this week, on this topic, this idea of what we call open-handedness, this idea of our relationship to this powerful thing that we all deal with called money. And so we're going to continue doing that today from the book of Proverbs. So if you have a Bible or a phone or a tablet, whatever you got, if you want to open up to the book of Proverbs, that's what we're going to sort of be in a little bit today. I'm going to actually read just a couple of verses that are going to set up sort of the idea of today, and we're going to jump around a bit. So if you don't know much about the Bible, first off, the book of Proverbs is found in what we as Christians call the Old Testament. It's a part of the Bible that sort of pre-Jesus. It chronicles for us the sort of first covenant, the older covenant that God made with His people Israel, and how He's going to display His life and who He is and what He's going to do to redeem the world through them. And then we get to Jesus in the new covenant, which is sort of how He supersedes and makes it better. It's the better covenant of grace and mercy and God's love poured out on the cross. But in the Old Covenant, in the Old Testament, what we find is this sort of books that we call the wisdom literature. And it's these books that try to explain how to sort of live life in the world that God made. And the motif, the idea around it is you can imagine a father sort of looking at his son, the next generation, trying to raise them to do well in God's world, and sort of pass on some wisdom, a sage, sort of helping the young person learn life. And so that's sort of the idea. So we're going to read a couple of verses that set up what we're going to continue to talk about today. Start in chapter 24. We're going to read verse 3 and 4. And this is what we read today. It says this: "By wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. And by knowledge, the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches." Let's just pray again. Jesus, I thank You so much for today. I thank You for what You're going to do here this morning. I know that You have a word for our church to teach us and lead us, and I pray that we will be encouraged. I pray that we will be comforted, but also challenged, convicted, that we will be led by You, God, that we would not desire anything less than what You have for us, God. I pray You would take the gifts You've called me to steward, God, for the good of this church, the glory of Your name, and use them today any way that You need. God, I pray if there's anything in Mike that is not of You, God, anything that I think is good, but if it's not from Your heart, would You just silence it right now? God, would You use these feeble words of this broken instrument, God, to do some amazing things today? Would You just, Holy Spirit, be the one that truly speaks to our hearts today? We thank You for this. In Your name we pray. Amen. Amen. Anyone ever built a house before? Anyone ever done that before? Right? Like I've never done that. I've confessed to this church that I am not the handiest of men. Building a house for me, legit, means going to the dollar store, buying a birdhouse that's pre-made, gluing on the last little piece because I can use a glue gun and calling it a house. Like I can do that really well, right? I'll take anyone on that one. I don't care how good of a carpenter you are. I'll beat you there because I'll get my wife to be all pretty with it, and then so she'll beat you on it. But nonetheless, I know at least this much, that if I were to build a house, right, I probably wouldn't go into it with the plan of winging it. You know what I'm saying? But like if I just go in thinking, I'm just going to build this and I'll just go as I feel. I'm going to try this over here and do it. That would not be a good plan. Can we argue that, right? Like anybody knows if you're going to build a house, like don't go into it without sort of a plan in place. And I know some of you might be thinking, well, I'm just this master carpenter. I've done it all. I could just do it yourself. You know what? More power to you. You're going to be like Jesus, all carpentry and whatnot. Not all of us can do that, right? Because here, how about this one? If someone comes to you and says, Mike, or not Mike, obviously not, because your name's not Mike. If someone came to me and said, hey, Mike, I want to build your house. Cool. And he goes, but you know what? I'm going to do it completely differently than normal. I'd be intrigued. I'll say, okay. He goes, I'm just going to sort of build it as I feel it. I wouldn't pay him. Can we be real? Right? Like I wouldn't live there. If you told me, Mike, I built this house, it's awesome, it looks good. I didn't really have a plan, but I want you to just kind of see it and live. I wouldn't come to your house. Right? I let my cat go there maybe because if it falls down and kills the cat, what can you do, right? I'm just kidding. Low-hanging fruit, here's the easy one. I grew up with cats. I like cats. Rather, have a dog, but whatever. Right? I'm not saying anything bad about cats that, Jesus probably didn't mean to make them. But moving on, right? The point is this. Sam, I know you like cats. I'm sorry, but the point is this. No one in their right mind's like, you know what? I'm just going to wing this house, right? We all can like, is that agreed upon, right? That's a good idea, right? Something so practical like that. Here's the problem I have. We can agree to that, but when it comes to something else very practical, and you could argue building the home, the house of your life, right? This thing in finances, we don't often take the same approach. When it comes to money, we'll often, I'll just wing it. I know how much sort of comes in. I know how sort of goes out. And then we get all stressed and worried. But here's the thing. Maybe if we treated the way that we have money, the way that we would go out building an actual house, we might be better off. I'm just throwing it out there, right? If we actually had a plan, had some purpose, had a little patience in our life, we actually might see some good things come out of life. And we're going to go there a little bit today. This is week 2 of a series on money. And last week we began this conversation. So I want to catch us all up before we dig into today around this idea of how we're supposed to relate to money as Christians. Because here's the thing. God has a very specific definition on how we're supposed to relate to this thing called money. Right? We talked about last week how God sort of wants to redefine, right? Kind of have that DTR, define the relationship talk with money, and you find out that you love money way more than you're supposed to, right? That's the awkward part about it. And as a Christian, though, what we believe is that we own nothing. Nothing. You possess nothing. You are simply a steward of the blessing of God for a season of your life to manage it well with a generous heart for the glory of God and the good of people. That seriously, money for us is meant to be nothing more than a tool of the mission of God in our life. The question becomes, do you love money or do you love God? Because Jesus, right, this is the crazy thing. Jesus said, your heart will not be divided in this. You will either love money or love God. One of two options, right? Not half and half. You will either serve money or serve God with your money. That's it. Because at the end of the day, it's actually a worship issue. So here's the thing. If you're a Christian or not, if you're a human being, are we all humans in the room? Can we just sort of all be unanimous on that, hopefully? Right? Like, any aliens, that would be real weird. It'd be a cool day, though, right? Discover aliens at Risen City Church. Right? We're all humans. Here's the thing. That means this. You all worship. You might not call it worship, but we all worship. We all have something in the highest place, something that drives our life, gives our greatest value and priority, and it has our hearts. The reason why we dream about and think about it and fear, we worship all the time. Human beings are made to do this. And the question is, what do you worship? Who do you worship? Jesus says you're either going to worship God or money. So which one is it? Right? And we said, well, how do we figure that out? Because that's really the question. Is where's our hearts at? And he said, well, actually, you can figure that out very, very simply. Where your treasure is, there your heart is also. Where you spend your money, you will find out what you love. What demands most of your resource, you'll find out what you actually prioritize and value and love. And here's the thing, no matter who you are, you can say all that you want. Well, my value is God and whatever. Most of us, if we're going to be real honest, operate at the level of sort of me first, serve me, my stuff, my needs, spend on me, because that's what money is for in our life. We'll often sort of view money in this weird kind of way that feels right, but that's the thing about greed. It always feels right. It feels natural. It feels rational. But what we said was this, that God comes in and says, hey, there's a different way of doing this thing called money. There's a different way of relating to this thing called money. There's a countercultural kind of way that we're called to live with this thing called money. And then we ended the last sort of week on this conversation around this thought that generosity then, if we are called to be generous, is not going to happen if you don't plan for it. That it's as much an overflow of knowing Jesus as it is a discipline of our faith. Because what we said was this, if you remember, that at the end of the day, generosity in the Christian, the reason why we are called to be generous is because of this thing called the gospel, the foundation of our life, our faith, that God was generous towards you. He gave everything to you so that you would have salvation. That not that you deserved it, not that you could earn it, not that you could merit it, sustain it, or keep it, but God lavishly pours out love and grace and mercy and life to us all the time. And we will reflect what we worship. So because we are someone who is caught up in the grace of God, it's meant to change how we view everything. That hear me today. The way that sometimes grace doesn't make sense to us, that God could love someone like me, that God would always pursue me and always invite. The way that grace doesn't make sense should be the same way that that our generosity doesn't always make sense. That the way that you deal with money doesn't make people who don't follow Jesus confused sometimes. You probably aren't dealing with money the way that you should be. Right? And then we said it's also a discipline. It's also a plan. That one of the most spiritual things I can do is actually choose to be generous in my life. And this is where it begins to rub up against us a little bit. Where Jesus' way begins to sort of act like sandpaper on our souls and sort of rub off some of the hard edges. Because here's the thing that we often forget. That if you read through the words of Jesus, what you begin to realize is that he operated at the assumption, or maybe we could better say the expectation, that his people would be giving away their money. In fact, in Matthew chapter 6, in the Sermon on the Mount, he says this. I think I have it on the screen, potentially. Did I remember that? No, next one. Maybe I didn't put it in. That might be my fault, Heather. Take that one away. It's all good. He says this. Trust me. You can look it up later. He says this. And when you give, not if you feel like it. He says, and when you give, in this case to the poor, do it like this. See, Jesus operated at the expectation that his people would be marked by generosity. Here's a good question. When people think about you, do they think of generous? Because that's how we're supposed to be defined as Jesus' people. By our generosity. And when you give. So now this sets up something for us, because if we said that last week, we're supposed to be faithful stewards. But we're also supposed to be generous stewards, right? That means we are called to be faithful and generous. Now, the weird thing is, we often think those things are mutually exclusive, right? That they don't go in the same room. Kind of like winning the Stanley Cup and the Maple Leafs, right? Like they're just not going to be in the same conversation. You know what I'm saying? Right? And I know what you're saying. It's a good year. Guess what? You want to cheer for a winning team? This is some good life advice. Cheer for the Raptors. Just put it out there, right? Like not that I'm biased against basketball and hockey, but I'm just saying, if you actually want to have a worthwhile team this year, right? Maybe next year the Leafs could do it, but let's be real. They'll make the playoffs and choke like basically every year. But this is the thing we got with the Raptors. We got Kawhi killing it every single game. Danny Green, right? Like why are you not cheering for them? It's a spiritual issue, right? You got some problems if you're not. Here's the thing though, right? But for real, right? These things, this generosity and faithfulness actually are the same thing for us. It's not like you're wise with your money and therefore you're not generous. It's the same conversation. So for us today, the question becomes this. How do we then go about this? How do we be faithful, generous stewards of the money that God's given us? How do we work this out? And this is where we want to go today and begin talking about how we sort of deal with money. And so I want to give you basically 4 thoughts on this to help you figure out how to be a generous steward of what God's given you. The first one is this. Get over yourself. Can we be real? I know I say that like every single week, but let's be real. That's Mike, right? We're going to have an honest conversation. You love yourself so much. So much. You are addicted to your own comfort, your own pleasure, your own lifestyle. And can I just be honest? There is so much more to live for than your own comfort. There's so much greater that God actually wants for your life than just spending your life in the pursuit of your own shallow comfort. There's so much more, right? We called it the joy of generosity last week. There's so much more joy in being generous than there is in selfishness. Although it feels better in the moment maybe to be a little selfish, the ultimate joy you're pursuing comes through actually being generous and another center. The first thing you got to figure out if you actually want to get smart with your money is don't love yourself so much. Don't be all about you, because guess what? If we believe that God is who He is, He has our best interests in mind. And we are going to come back to that in just a moment, right? So that's number one. Just get over yourself. And that one should be, that's sort of last week, just rehashed. I just want to make sure we caught that one. So the real three things today are this, okay? I want to talk through these real three things real quick. We have to be on purpose, we have to be patient, and we have to be planned. If you want to be a faithful, generous steward of God, of the wealth that God's given you, you have to be on purpose, you have to be patient, and you need to be planned. Three things, all right? So the first one is this idea of purpose. Now, here's the thing, right? We should be living our life with our money out of the place of our value. That value should be driving how we spend and how we organize this money. And this is kind of the thing we've been talking about since last week, that we're trying to let the gospel of God, the generosity of God, the love of God reshape what we love. Because if Jesus is true and where our treasure goes, there our heart is, we will know exactly how our values do shape everything that we do. So we want to begin having this conversation that maybe there's a greater purpose for the wealth God might give you. There's greater reason for the resource you have. And I would actually ask a fundamental question beneath that will sort of help us, because at the end of the day, money becomes a value expression, not the value itself, which means this. Why do you wake up every morning? What is the purpose of your life? Why did you breathe today? Why do you go to work? Why do you do what you do? What is the purpose of your life? Because as Christians, what we begin to see is that our resources, what God's given us, not just in money, but time and talent, these things are meant to be facilitators of the mission of God in my life, in and through me. That they're supposed to make it happen, that the purpose of God can be made to be bared in my life. So the question really becomes this. If you don't know the purpose that God has for your life, you can't really be on purpose with your money. So why do you wake up today? Why are you going to wake up tomorrow? What is the driving factor of your life? See, for most of us, if we're going to be real, if we're going to be honest, it's not the mission of God. It's ourselves. We just got to call it out, right? We will often live at the my needs, my wants, my comfort, my luxury, my stuff, serve me, do me. That's what I'm living at. Here's the problem. If you do not begin to see that the resource God has given you is so much more than an avenue of your own sort of lifestyle and luxury, you will never get to the place that God actually has for you. Because I believe that there's a greater purpose for your life that it always will be expressed in an other-centered way than a me-first thing. But if that can't be facilitated and resourced by what God has given you, you will never live at the level that God has for your life. Do you know why you were made? Yes, to worship God, obviously. We would say that. Yes, to love people. But how? How is God calling you to live your life? How is God calling you to organize your time? Because guess what? The way that you organize displays what you believe about your purpose. Because your purpose will drive everything that you ultimately do. See, the reason why some of you today walk around and you feel apathetic in life is because you don't know why God formed you. The reason why some of you walk around and you're fearful of the future is because you don't know why God lets you live today. That's a conversation that you don't have. But I want you to know this, that it is greater than what you're currently living at. That there's a mission of God in the world to bring about hope to the hopeless, light into the darkness, grace to where there is sin. That there is something for us to live on. And the money that God's given you is meant to resource His purpose in your life. So if you can't answer the question, why am I alive today? Then you're going to have a hard time answering the question, how does my money facilitate that? How do I plan for that? Right? And by the way, part of that purpose, right, means that we do need to provide. Right? Provision's part of the purpose because we need to make sure we set up a life that allows me to actually do what God's called me to do. And that changes all the time. This is what I want us to understand today. That the way that your life sort of is called for by God changes in all seasons. Right? It's not just one sort of missional thing at all times. Because here's the thing. When you're single and maybe you're in college, right, the demands on your provision purpose are different than when you get a wife or a husband. Or than when you have kids. Right? The money that's meant to flourish the life of your spouse and your children is sort of required at a different level than when you don't have them. Can I be real? Right? Like that should make sense. Right? That, hey, if I don't got kids, I don't got to feed them. Right? Kids are great, but they need food every day. Right? So the calling of the provision of my life actually increases in this season of change. So here's the question. We should constantly be evaluating the purpose and the calling that God has for us because it changes. The weights change on our life. The demands will change on your life. Like if you're someone who has kids and they're grown up and they're adults, it is not your purpose to be meeting their basic needs any longer. They need to grow up. If you're someone who's an adult still depending on your kids, or on your parents, you need to grow up. It is not their calling to give your basic needs anymore. Right? You got to figure out the purpose for your life and actually become the person that God wants you to be. Right? There's called a maturation process here. Right? And so as Christians, what we need to be constantly doing is evaluating God. What is the purpose in my moment? Right? For me right now, I got a wife, I got kids, we have this church, right? God's called me to lead in here. So my money needs to be facilitating the possibility that is being blessed all the time. My wife, my kids, this church. That's how I have to see my life, my resource. What's it for you? Because it changes. Once you get married, it changes. Once you get kids, once the kids move out, it changes. Are you reevaluating, God, what is my purpose right now? Beyond mission, beyond the general Christian things, how about your specific season? What is God calling you for? Because your money should facilitate that. It should be on purpose. Why did you wake up this morning? Do you know? What are you called to accomplish tomorrow? Do you know? Number 2 is this. Be patient. Be patient. Can we have an honest conversation just for a moment? That might sting a little bit. Even if you say, no, I'm going to do it. So just come along with me here. Right? Our culture has a problem with impulse control. Right? If I'm going to be real, and this is me, I'm going to put myself in this conversation, right? When it comes to money and stuff, most of us function at about a 3-year-old level. Right? Where we are driven by desire, right? And gullible to our impulses. I got a little girl. She's 3 years old. She's the cutest kid in this whole church, if I do say so myself. You can tell me otherwise, but I just won't believe you because you're wrong, right? It's called My Truth now, right? Anyways, right? And she'll come to us, and my wife and I, and she has this hard time differentiating between what she wants and what she needs. And no matter what it is, it might be a glass of water, which is obviously pretty essential to life, or it could be Polly Pocket, which she's into right now. Doesn't matter. But she says the same thing. Dad, I need it. And she does this little song thing. I don't know if she thinks it's going to convince me more of it, but she does this little song and dance. It's cute. It's wonderful. It's what kids are. Cute, wonderful, but sometimes, annoying. And so she comes up and she says that. And Emily and I have been very quick to change this. And we'll say, Liv, no, you do not need this. You want this. And she'll look back at me and say, Dad, yes, I want it. And she'll sing it back to me. I don't know what this is in her brain. But anyways, and the reason why this is so important, is because we don't often get that. You do not need what you think you do. Hear me today. I want this to sting a little bit, okay? You do not need so badly that thing, that trip, that whatever that you want that's worth going to debt for. If it's so important, save for it. And in 3 months, is it still as important? Is it still going to be beneficial to the flourishing of your life and the fulfilling of your calling? Then go ahead. Because I don't know if you realize this, but in the book of Proverbs, the Bible likens debt to slavery. So maybe you could ask it like this. Is that thing worth slavery? I know we don't like talking about it all that much, but listen to me. Just because you have a Visa card doesn't mean you should use it. Wow, real quiet all of a sudden. But it's true. Like, we got to grow some patience here and realize that things we desire in a moment doesn't mean I need it. Like if there's one line, maybe remember this. Just because I desire it doesn't mean I require it. That was a good one. I'm going to say it again so you can write that thing down, right? Just because I desire it doesn't mean I require it. Just because I want it right now doesn't mean I should go and purchase it, should have it, go into debt for it. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm fully aware of the fact, right, that there are some unexpected things that come up in life. There are some what we would call necessary debts in our current culture and system. You got to get some mortgages and things like that. I'm not saying that we are to be debt averse because that's just sometimes impossible. But what I am saying, for most people, the debt that we carry was dumb. Buying things we don't really need in a moment to impress people we don't really like but want them to know about our life that much. Because I want you to get, you do not need all that you're told that you need. You do not need it. You don't deserve it. Oh, no, that one hurt. Yeah, I do. No, you don't. Let's just have an honest conversation. You don't need half the stuff probably in your home right now. But it's sitting there, wasting away, taking up space. But I needed it 3 months ago. No, you didn't. Can we just talk real for a second? We would rather, right, put ourselves in financial hardship than just say no in a moment. That's not wise. It's not smart. It's not good. And the Bible is true. It's voluntary slavery. We have to be able to say no now so we can say yes to greater in the future. We have to say no now. We have to have some patience with our spending. Ask ourselves, do I really need this? Or do I want it? It's not bad to bless yourself. Don't get me wrong. We'll get to that in a minute. But we got to be patient here. Or how about this one? How about this one? When it comes to patience, there's also the idea that the Bible says actually in the book of Proverbs that a wise man has enough for an inheritance for his kids. That he uses his money for the future. He sees the long game, saves, invests, and waits. Doesn't chase get rich quick schemes because they don't often work. I would argue probably never, right? Unless you're really lucky and you got a stock one time and now you're, I don't know, a billionaire, whatever. That's great for you. Doesn't happen for the average person, right? But what does happen? You save it, collect some interest, it grows, you invest it, you save it, you collect, it grows, invest it, and guess what? That's a long time. Like, I'm no financial expert here, but here's what I do know. Time is your friend in this case. Right? But I want to know, hey, just cool your jets. Just wait on this. We have to be patient here. And then third, probably the most important for today, we have to be planned. We have to be planned. Because here's the thing. Can I be real with you guys? As I was thinking about this and doing some work for it, I heard this podcast, and this is what the lady, she's a financial sort of advisor, and she said this. At the end of the day, when it comes to money, especially Christian stewardship, 20% of it is knowledge, 80% of it is hard work. Yeah, they got to learn some stuff, got to learn some skills. At the end of the day, it's you just being disciplined enough to cultivate a life where generosity can happen. See, faithfulness is saying, God, I'm going to build my life the way you want me to build it and actually put into my life the margin that you've called me to put into it. See, it's not easy. But here's the question. When was something worth doing easy? See, we often treat money for some reason like some people treat the gym, right? Like there are people, and I know it's probably a caricature, but we'll go to the gym like 3 times and think, like, why am I not jacked yet? Because you went 3 times, bro, right? It takes time. It takes effort. It takes a long time. Like sometimes if I don't work out for a while, like I'll work out once and I'll just feel jacked, right? Because like all the blood's rushing to my muscles and I'm like, yeah, this is awesome. And then by the next morning, it's gone and I look like a skinny kid again. But like if I just thought that that's how it worked, right, I'd never actually get in shape. But some reason we think about that way with our money. It's supposed to be easy. It's not going to be easy because you're selfish. And some of us are lazy. And greedy. And money supports those addictions. See, this is where we come to Proverbs 24, where he's writing, he says this, by wisdom my house is built. Now, you can take that literally or figuratively. In my case, I believe it's more of a figurative picture of life. The wisdom building this house, this home, this life that I have. And you have to remember, in the book of Proverbs, the word wisdom always refers to a very simple but yet super far-reaching and almost, I would say, complex thing of the fear of God. In the book of Proverbs, wisdom is not just some random life advice. It's understanding that God is the creator of the universe. I am the creature, and I've been made to function certain ways in the world that He formed. And that the fear of the God is aligning myself with that so that I might achieve the flourishing He has for you. I need you to remember this right now. Is this, and I don't know if you've ever been told, well, if you've been at Risen, I know you've been told this before, but if you've never heard this before, this might be the best news that you hear. The purpose of God, the plan of God for your life ultimately is joy. I want you to get this. It's joy. It's flourishing, right? We don't often tell that story enough. So if you've heard the whole story of Jesus, but it never ended with anyone's joy for your life, you heard the wrong story. Seriously. You heard the wrong one. Because Jesus promises it all the time. Complete joy, fullness of joy, life abundant. Yes, He does promise trials and persecutions as well. But on top of that, joy. Right? And that if we follow the way of the kingdom, we follow the way of heaven, we will achieve this joy that sits beneath the surface. Because most of us, we're hungry for it, but we go and search for it in so many shallow different places, thinking just the fun or the happy or the high will actually fulfill the need. It won't, and you know it. So don't kid yourself. Right? There is a joy that runs deeper than the surface. And the problem is, it's often not what we think. And this is where Jesus begins to sort of change our thoughts, change our patterns a little bit. Because His joy does not end. His joy is forever, but it's often countercultural. It lives differently than the way that you expect. It's deeper than you thought. It's better than you can imagine, but it's different. His ways are higher, as Isaiah says. And so we come to this and we hear that wisdom, fear of the Lord, doing the way of Jesus in the way that God has called me. This is how my house gets built. This is how my life gets put together. By understanding and knowledge, by being able to apply it and work it out, I'm securing and filling my home with riches. Now here's the thing. Did you notice the house gets built? Not just hoped for. Not just by accident. Because to build something, you need a plan. You need to be patient. And you have some purpose. I didn't just pull those things out of the air, people. Right? So it's all hopefully beginning to come together, that these things have to work together. When we think about God, we come, whoa, think about it. Mike's technology. Y'all can still hear me. I could yell, you still hear me anyway. Let's be real. And when we think about it, right, we just have to be able to recognize that these are part of what we need to do. And so he says that the house, the life is built by wisdom, the fear of the Lord, by understanding. But then in Proverbs chapter 6, the father, he's speaking to his son, and he also says this, go and watch the ants. Go and look at the insects. Now, the only picture I can think of for this right now is my son. My son is 1.5. And we live in sort of an older home built in like the 1800s. And so there's a lot of crevices and holes and things, and bugs love our house. It's not awesome in the morning when the first thing that greets you is, this long of a centipede, but like it's there. And my kid, he loves it. He literally gets down on his belly and just stares at the bugs and just says, bug. I like it, bug. And he'll look at me and go, bee? I'm like, no, it's not a bee. Bug, yes, we'll go with bug, right? Because I don't know what they are. Some of them potato bugs. I'm not what's a bug person? Biologist, but I'm sure there's a special name for that. If you're a bug person, forgive me for offending you. Whatever. Anyways, right? And he says, go look at it and be like my son. Go and study, because he says this, that these ants, they have no master, they have no king, but somehow they work hard enough to store up enough food for when it gets hard. And he goes, go be like that. Don't be lazy. Don't be some 35-year-old guy living in your mama's basement. Grow up, learn life, do what it takes, mature. Don't be lazy. That's literally what he's trying to tell his kid. Do the hard work of provision. Do the hard work of stewardship. Do the hard work of this. And so I want to help us do that for the rest of our time today. And as we think about planning how to be faithful, how to be generous, there are actually some principles that need to guide us as Christians. Now, if you're a Christian in the room today, first off, I'm so pumped that you are joining us and you are here. These principles, I guarantee you, because it's good wisdom from God, will help. But they'll be better if you follow Jesus. Just putting it out there. But here's the thing. I want to give us sort of 4 quick thoughts on this idea of being planned, but under one big heading. One big heading, okay? And it's going to define everything about the next, about 15 minutes, okay? And it's this, as a Christian, our decision is this: I will choose to sacrificially live beneath my means. That's the secret. I'm going to choose to sacrificially live beneath my means. I'm going to choose a simpler, more generous life on purpose to facilitate the things of God. I'm going to choose not to spend as much as I could. See, for the Christian, it's not about what I could do with my money. It's what I'm called to do. And so 4 thoughts quick, all right? So the first one is this. How do we live in it? Is this. It's called off the top. Off the top. Off the top. All right? So the first idea is this. As a Christian, right, there's this common sort of framework that one of the places of our generosity goes to the church. That we give to the mission of God where we're planted in this thing called the local church. That we just give money to what God's doing wherever we are. And most people view this as a kind of cut and dry issue in the Christian world, right? You're supposed to do that. And for some, it's cut and dry, this idea of the tithe, the 10%. That's what good Christians give, 10% to the church. Here's the problem. It's not that simple. Right? Because we look to that and think that's the definition of trust. Because the principle is that we trust God first. We give Him our money first. It's this idea of worship and honor to God. And guess what? That's a good idea. You should be trusting God with your money first. But the question becomes, are we tied to the tithe as New Testament believers? And here's the answer. It's going to confuse you. Yes and no. Mike, that's not an answer. Yes, it is. I'll show you why. You want to know why? Because here's the thing, right? People who like to be strict on the 10% they'll look back to the Old Covenant, to the Old Testament, and say, well, they give this thing called a tithe. You know what? You know what's crazy? If you want to be a strict Old Testament believer in this kind of way, then guess what you should be giving? About 28%. So if you want to be strict Old Testament principle, please do. I won't stop you. I will enjoy that, in fact. I won't treat you any better because the Bible says show no partiality to the rich or to the poor. But the church would be glad to have you giving 30% of your income. Right? Because church ain't cheap. Right? But here's the thing. Right? The point actually wasn't that. See, because when it comes to Jesus and Paul, right, no one gives an actual number. No one gives a number. What do they give? An attitude. This is what we need to begin to see. Is both Jesus and Paul, when they talk about giving, it's always the heart issue. Giving to the temple, giving to the mission of God, giving to the place that you're planted. It's always actually a hard issue. In fact, Jesus, in Mark chapter 12, he sees this lady, and she is poor as poor can be. You know what I'm saying? Right? Like she can't give nothing. And she gives basically 2 pennies. And he looks at her and shows all his disciples and says, look at this woman. Right? She has given more than any rich person ever could. Because she has given out of her lack, not her abundance. See, because the principle he was trying to show them is, guys, it's not about the amount, it's about the sacrifice. In fact, in Proverbs chapter 3, it says, honor God with your first fruits or with your best gift, and He'll fill your house. Honor God with the first, and the first expense should be to God's work. And you know what? It should hurt a little bit. we haven't really had this conversation as a church yet in this way, but I don't want you to hear what I'm not saying, because obviously as the preacher, the guy telling the church we need to be given to the church, it can be a little awkward. But here's the thing, right? If we take seriously the principles of Jesus and Paul in the New Testament, when you give to the church, it should be uncomfortable. That's the reason why 10% is not demanded. Because hear me today, if 1% is hard for you, that's probably what you should be giving. If it's uncomfortable, if it's sacrificial, yeah. Because see, there's people in this room right now where 10% is easy. And you use 10% as an excuse to be greedy. Because if it's not uncomfortable, you're probably not sacrificing. And by the way, 0 is never an option for a Christian. Because no, you cannot tithe with your time, college students. Just put it out there. Right? Unpopular opinion, but the problem is you're wrong. So, just got to tell you. Right? When it comes to giving to God's church and God's mission, right, the goal is not to compare amounts. I don't care if you give 10%, 1%, I don't care. The question is this: if God has put it on your heart to give, are you joyfully and sacrificially being obedient in it? Is it hurting a little bit? Is it uncomfortable a little bit? Because if it's not, you're probably not giving at the level God's called you to. off the top. So already, I don't know if you noticed this, but if it's off the top, that means I'm already living below my means on purpose. Which, interesting enough, psychologically helps you be wiser with the rest because you already know you're living on less. Actually, a really good principle outside of the church. But then number two, planning is this. Plan to save and reduce debt. Coming up again, I know, but we have to get this. Part of our planning budget should right away go to saving for the future. Because I want you to do this. I want you to think about this, right? The future version of you, right, future you, should be proud of decisions you made today financially. You should be loving your future state by making good, wise decisions right now. And for some of you, it might not be saving because you're not in that space. It might be debt reduction. So do that. Put money away. And hear me, this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I think we just got to say it. If you have a bunch of debt looming over your head, you don't need to buy $5 coffees every single day. But it's coffee. Yeah, or pay off your debt. Go home, buy a coffee maker, buy a bunch of beans, make it for way cheaper. But it doesn't taste as good. What I want to say to you and what I should say as your pastor are very different. Right? Like, that's ridiculous. Right? Buying yourself a cup of coffee every so often, fine. Go ahead, do it. Show and tell is great. I love it. Go there all the time. But listen to me. If you got a bunch of student debt looming over your head, don't waste your money. You don't need it. You're not free. Right? Like, we have to choose to say no now to say yes to better. We have to make some sacrifices in the immediate. Plan for that so I can set my future up better. Right? So that maybe one day I can afford the $5 a coffee if I want to. Where right now, maybe you can't. If you're carrying debt, right? It's not like you have that just sitting there. Like, you're minus. Like, we realize that, right? And so the goal is to get that to not be minus. Right? We just got to think through this a little bit. Plan to already save and put some off. Number 3, plan generosity. Plan generosity. The third budget line I should be having is my generosity budget. Where I choose to put money out of my life to help people around me. Because here's the thing. This is why the point we made last week is if you don't plan for it, you won't actually do it. Why? Because most of us, we will relegate and put it at the end of the month. Well, once all the expenses are paid, once maybe I have a little bit more, a good bonus this year, then I'll be... No, you won't. Why? Because something else will come up. You'll find another reason to spend, another thing to do it, and most likely you won't actually need to spend it on what you spend it on, but it came up, it was a good decision. There's the third concert this month, I just really needed to go. Here's the problem. If you spend more, right, and I don't want to pick on just low-level things, but if you're spending more on coffee a month than on helping people, you have a problem. If you spend more on gaming than the poor, you have a problem. You are selfish and greedy. Not that you can't buy coffee and can't game and can't have nice things, but where's your heart at? Like, this we have to be constantly thinking through. We are called to a greater life than just me. If I don't plan it, I won't actually do it because we often struggle with this very thing. So I'm going to choose to put into my budget line a thing that says, you know what, I'm going to spend this money. I'm going to bless some people. I'm going to help the poor around me. I'm going to pay for a kid to eat in Africa. I'm actually going to do this. And then number four is now you can spend it. Oh, but I should clarify that a little bit. Because if you've been tracking with me for the last 10 minutes, I've just set you up with a really good budget equation. I have it on the screen, actually. Pop it up for me, Heather. Let's walk this through. Your income, whatever you make, minus your tithe or offering, minus your saving, minus your generosity becomes now your living expense. Which first demands what? Provision. Paying for a house, car, food, blessing your family, taking care of things, facilitating the purpose of your life. And then if there's some left over, then, by the way, it's not disposable, it's just reinvestable. If you choose to spend it on something that's more, pleasure-based, fine, do that, but have a purpose for it. Don't just throw it away like it's nothing. Understand why you're doing what you... See, most of the problem is we do not take time to be aware of what's going on. We don't sit down to the few hours it's going to take to actually plan this thing out. The reason why some of us are so bad at financial stewardship is because we are lazy. Not popular opinion, but true. Some of us, we've been put into a space where we had no choice. And I want you to know, I'm sensitive for that. I feel that for you. Whether it's unexpected things come up, medical things, whatnot, you're in a space where you can't really get ahead, and I get that. So this is more of the goal than the reality. But I would argue that this is the way that God desires for us to set up our life. And I'm not saying, by the way, the first half is like 50% or anything like that. Right? Unless that's possible for you because you're loaded and made some tech. Let's just be real. If you are, I like the cake. Then we can go for dinner after. But here's the thing, right? It's choosing what has God called you for in these categories. And actually planning to live less so I can actually be more generous. I'm going to choose to experience the joy of generosity than the less of selfishness. See, because here's the thing, right? At the end of the day, if we're building our homes with wisdom, and actually, Ben, you guys can come up. I want to end with this thought. If we're building our house with wisdom, then it ultimately becomes a reflection of our worship. And it's got to come back to this conversation. It has to. Because here's the thing, right? It's not just asking you the simple question, hey, do you have a budget? Which, ironically, most of us will say no. It's a deeper question. Do you have a budget that reflects your worship? Do you have a budget that reflects your purpose? Do you work hard to cultivate the spiritual disciplines of generosity because you realize that there's greater for your life than where you're currently living? This is a worship issue, Christians. Christians, if you are in the room today, I would challenge you to take a few hours today and think about, where's my money going? To think about, hey, do I actually plan for the purpose of God in my life? Am I aware? Spouses, maybe one of you are better with money. Guess what one should be handling the money? The one that's better, right? I don't care if you're the guy or the girl. Let's not be all weird about it. Here's the thing. Jesus, he told this parable. And he described this rich man. And he made a bunch of money. And he goes and he has to make a decision. What is he going to do? And he says, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to store it up. I'm going to build some barns. Which seems like a sensible idea to store your money. But then he says, and then I'm going to go. I'm just going to eat. I'm going to drink. I'm going to be merry. I'm going to spend my life. And Jesus says, well, and then that night God required of him. And he says he stands before God, and Jesus says this is the point. Your life is not found in the abundance of riches, but in being rich towards God. I don't want you to figure out generosity and all this stuff so you can go home and be rich. If that happens, great. What I want for you is deeper than that. I don't want you just to be less stressed about money. I want you to be free of selfishness. I don't want you to just be free of anxiety about the stuff. I want you to know what joy is. I want you to know what strength is. I want you to know what freedom is. Because these are the things that have to dictate the way that we actually handle our money. Christians in the room today, listen to me. There is greater purpose for your life that you cannot facilitate if you don't financially steward your life well. There are things you are missing out on if you don't know how to wisely handle the resource God has given you. There's responsibility God can't give you if you won't be mature enough to do this well. There's greater for your life. If you're here today and you're not a Christian, I want you to hear this too. This is an invitation for you. Because here's what I know about you. I might not know your name. I might not know your story. But here's what I know. God has greater for your life than where you're currently living. There's more joy. There's more grace, there's more hope, there's more purpose than to wake up every day and just live for the self, live for you. Because hear me today, that puts you at odds with the maker of heaven and earth. But because he loved you so much, he gave everything to pay a debt you could never pay back. The debt of our sin. And his grace on the cross, dying and giving life itself, rising up out of a grave and calling you to greater life.